Imagine an executioner who has never pulled a trigger in his life and who even felt sick in the face of extreme violence or death or bloodshed to the point of risking collapse or fainting. Think of a bureaucrat who has always made the climb to power and his own reason for living, but stooping to any low, even the worst. Imagine above all a man who, despite having an extremely violent nature, but as said was not prone to violence, as a young man was eager to become an officer, but then never fought, and in the end became the head of one of the largest armies in the world. A life, we could define it, of continuous contradictions. Perhaps this is the best way to outline the figure of one of the darkest, saddest, most terrible henchmen of that regime, the Nazi one, which terrorized all of Europe for over 15 years in the first half of the 20th century. We're talking about Heinrich Himmler. Think of
a bureaucrat. A bureaucrat who has always made the climb to power and his own reason for living, however stooping to any low, even the worst.
Born into a wealthy family to the point of asking his parents to intercede for him to skip part of the classical education at the gymnasium and enter the military academy for the purpose of the First World War, Erich Limber grows up in an extremely nationalist environment. His problem is that being born on October 7th, 1900, he is too young first to actually enter the academy and then to reach the battlefields, because by the time of his 18th year, the Imperial Germany is already in retreat, and within less than a month it will surrender. After the so-called November Revolution, Himmler would theoretically be destined for an anonymous career as a bureaucrat, as a state official, were it not for his fervent nationalism, absolutely visceral, already emerging with the passing of the months after the peace hated by him as much as other Germans, the so-called Versailles account. The proof is that Himmler, despite never having fought, is found within a Freikorps, one of those irregular formations made up of former fighters still in arms who had disregarded the obligation to return home and therefore to abandon their weapons, to crush popular revolts and above all the temptations of the German Communist Party to establish Soviet republics on the model of the ex-Tsarist Russia, which was facing its civil war at the same time. Himmler thus finds himself side by side with several former fighters who have a decent experience. While he is essentially a novice when it comes to fighting, but he is still appreciated. Meanwhile, he finishes his studies becoming an agricultural expert, but never practices, favoring politics instead. He likes the politics of the 20s, that noisy, quarrelsome politics, more prone to shouting and fighting than to dialogue, even though he never fires a shot and never swings a truncheon. Strange for being a former Freikorps member, it's even stranger for being a man who has long, at least in words, proclaimed wanting to change things in Germany. Himmler wants to change things in Germany so much that he joined the Stab, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which since being taken over by Adolf Hitler has transformed. It has become an extremely revolutionary formation, up to the well-known beer hall putsch, the putsch that fails, but we have already talked about it, and it is a putsch that sees Himmler in a very low-key position, to the point that he is not even prosecuted. He gets away, he immediately comes out of pretrial custody, and from that moment it seems that we should no longer hear from him. During that period, when Hitler is in prison, Himmler gets closer to a new member of the state, Georg Strasser, the leader of what will be called the most radical wing of the party, the wing that would like to dialogue with the centrist and conservative parties on one hand, and on the other hand, carry forward a sort of constant national socialist revolution, somewhat on the model of the so-called fascist revolution in Italy. Himmler becomes Strasser's secretary. It's a good position to gain a bit of importance. But when Hitler gets out of prison and starts to reorganize the party, because he has understood that Germany cannot be conquered by a revolution, but only by electoral means, Himmler changes his horse. Strasser is judged to be a good leader, but not the absolute leader, and indeed, it will be so. Himmler prefers to move towards Hitler's positions, which gratify him, recognizes abilities in him, gives him assignments as Gauleiter, that is, as the person in charge of the Upper Palatinate area, Lower Bavaria, and then gives him a further role, that of organizer of a small personal guard, a sort of internal security service. These are the years when the Nazi Party relies on the mass of the Sturmabteilung, the brown shirts, Ernst Röhm's men, who are tasked by the party not only to openly wage war with the Reds, the socialists, the social democrats, the communists in the streets, but also to promote indiscriminate violence against Jews, Roma, homosexuals, Freemasons, all those who are opponents, political or ideological. Well, Himmler does not work directly for them. He is tasked with reorganizing a small section called SS Schutzstaffel, the protection section, which serves as Hitler's personal guard and begins to no longer trust the Sturmabteilung, which are too noisy, too violent, too brutal, and above all, there are really too many of them. They grow out of control. Himmler has a great intuition. The SS must be an elite compared to the mass of the Sturmabteilung. They must be the representation, the vivification of an ideal, that of the Germanic Superman that Hitler likes so much. And the SS gradually begin to rally around the leader, just like a real own Praetorian Guard. This is proven with the Night of the Long Knives. We have already talked about it in the 48 hours between the end of June and the beginning of July, just after taking power. Hitler settles scores with Ernst Röhm. And how does he settle the scores? Thanks to the SS, who accompany him armed to the spa residences of the Sturmabteilung leaders, who are arrested, taken to prison, and killed, or by leaving the Sturmabteilung and other opponents alone. For example, Georg Strasser, too uncomfortable, had tried to seduce Hitler to become vice-chancellor, better to get rid of him, or other politicians who had also tried to stand between Hitler and the chancellorship. These two are all eliminated. Journalists, these two, dangerous, are killed by the SS. And then there are the big news. There are the fields. But what fields? Starting from 1933, the SS began to build the first large concentration camp in Dachau, just outside Munich. Dachau becomes a model to be replicated in various areas of Germany, and subsequently also outside of Germany. These camps are designed to detain the political enemies of Nazism, not certainly to free them one day. They are not prisons. You go to those camps to die. You die from beatings, you die from hunger, you die from disease, you die from shooting or hanging. And Heinrich Himmler knows all about this. He knows everything that happens in there. He is the one who proposes to Hitler when the prisons start to burst with detainees, to inaugurate new camps, where to send the undesirables, where to send the enemies of the state.
Not the
common criminal, not the thief, for instance, and not even the murderer Tutkur. No, send all those who are mortal enemies of the Reich. They must be sent to the camps. They will never leave there because they will be killed in those camps, even if no one says it openly. The SS, with the fall of the Sturmabteilung, grow immeasurably, grow to the point that even Himmler himself needs to structure them. And he structures them by creating various sections, various organizations. The most important of these has an acronym, Reichssicherheit Hauptamt Reich, Sicherheit Hauptamt, High Office for the Security of the Reich. Pompous name, you might say, a name too high sounding, you're right, but it's a name that encompasses within it more offices, the Amt, which deal with various issues. There are personal, administrative, and logistics offices, much like other large companies. Then there's the Sicherheitsdienst, the security service, the Sicherheitspolizei, the security police, the Geheimenstaatspolizei, Gestapo, and then there's the criminal police, and there's the Foreign Secret Service. In short, the RSH becomes a Moloch, which, created by Himmler, is entrusted by him to one of his most loyal collaborators. Reinhard Heydrich, we've already talked about him, and Heydrich, always at a pyramidal level, surrounds himself with other loyalists, his creatures. Think of Adolf Eichmann, we've already talked about him too, or Bruno Streichenbach, who after the war will become the director of the department stores in Albergo, creating quite a scandal among other things. Or Alfred Naujoks, the man who provides the ideal casus belli for Germany to attack Poland, with the fake attack on the Gleiwitz radio station. Or again, think of Bernard Klug, the man of Operation Bernard, the man who forges dollars and pounds. Or to Walter Schellenberg, the one who will become a master of espionage through the Valone rat. And we also talked about him here. All men who work for Reinhard Heydrich or for Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, both reporting to Himmler. Or there is the other big central direction, that of economic affairs, entrusted to Richard Glücks, a very capable man who understands how to exploit everything that the SS managed to take, what they managed to get their hands on. Because every time a so-called enemy of the Reich is arrested and sent to the camps, his properties are confiscated. And who manages his properties from that moment forward, as if it were their own? The SS, who from that moment on begin to amass a real fortune. They own factories, businesses of
Construction of
travel companies, of chemical poles. In short, the SS also become an economic power that exploits everything it can get its hands on, everything that manages to enter the belly of the Black Order. It's chilling, isn't it? Yet it's reality. It comes to the point where Himmler, who in the meantime, with the outbreak of the war, also has a military assignment and pushes to create an armed body of the SS, goes from the first motorized nucleus of the SS to then become the Waffen-SS. Well, Himmler knows that all this can become a continuous source of wealth. Imagine
any
SS prisoner. If he's Russian or Polish, there's little to gain. He has almost nothing on him. If he's a Jew, Jews at the time traveled with at least some of their wealth. He is stripped of everything, even his shoes, even his clothes. He is given a prisoner's uniform. The clothing is inventoried, the shoe size, the clothing size, disinfected and sold. Then the suitcases, their contents, as mentioned, valuables, silver, gold, bearer bonds, everything is requisitioned. The valuables are melted down, or they are also entrusted to jewelers for an expertise and economic evaluation, and then sold, or they become part of the private collections of the hierarchs. The works of art, these too, are requisitioned and end up in some private gallery, usually of the Reich Marshal Goering, who has a strong taste for art, and the proceeds of all this end up in the pockets of the hierarchs or directly in the bank deposits of the SS, at whose top there is always him. That one with the round glasses and the rather chubby face, he would be called a slob. That one who, when he goes to inspect the concentration camps, ensures that the organization is at its maximum, but he never wants to witness an execution. That one who, on the rare occasions when he has visited the Einsatzgruppen, the death squads that swarm behind the army groups during the invasion of the Soviet Union, well, on those occasions, he has always tried to avoid seeing the executions. He only saw them a couple of times, and it didn't just upset him, it made him feel sick. He almost fainted or threw up.
incredible.
A butcher, a man who is fully aware of what is happening, does not have the strength to endure what happens because of his orders. It seems incredible, yet that was Heinrich Himmler. But Himmler didn't stop there. Himmler continued to have his own ambitions, even political ones. At a certain point behind Hitler, a sort of triumvirate forms, especially after Rudolf Hess, Hitler's secretary, who is his dolphin, takes a plane and flees to Scotland, officially to propose a separate peace to the English. From that moment on, Hitler only trusts four people: Martin Bormann, the party secretary; Goering, the Reich Marshal; Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda; Himmler, the head of the SS. These four, sometimes even competing with each other, especially Bormann and Goering, advise Hitler on various aspects, including military ones. At one point, Himmler asked the dictator for permission to transform the SS into a real Praetorian order, that is, with its own divisions of motorized infantry, mechanized armored divisions, mountain divisions. Permission granted, provided that the SS always remain an elite. In fact, initially the recruitment in the first divisions, think of Das Reich, which will become infamously famous in France because it is stained with various war crimes. We said recruitment is based on very strict racial issues. You can only join the Waffen-SS if you belong to one of the three major strains into which German society is ethnically divided. So pure Aryan, predominantly Nordic or phallic or harmonious bastard with predominant Nordic influences. Only with these three characteristics can you join the Waffen-SS, which are an elite corps, receive better training, better weapons, have priority on the availability of new weapons, even experiment with camouflage. The first corps in the world to use camouflage uniforms, not only. And the Waffen-SS, like the members of the Totenkopfverbände, that is the SS who, with the skull on their caps, oversee the camps, have priority in blood transfusions. Their blood type is tattooed under their armpit. This is because, in case they get injured, they come before all other soldiers. An elite body, but it is an elite body that is born with sinister intentions and becomes increasingly degenerate, even in the choice of men. What was supposed to be a body symbolizing Aryan precepts begins to recruit indiscriminately. Initially through the so-called Volksdeutsche, that is, those populations of allied or even invaded countries that aspire to some kind of German heritage. The settlers of Transylvania, considered Volksdeutsche, the Baltic people, the Tuani, the Latvians. But then it gets exaggerated. Ukrainians, Belarusians, Dutch, Belgians, and Leon Degrelle's people all joined the Waffen-SS. They even tried to establish a Waffen-SS Legion in Italy with Italian personnel. The Cossack Cavalry Corps of von Panwitz are transformed into divisions of the Waffen-SS, and certainly the Cossacks do not have German blood in their veins. It gets to the point where an entire mountain division, largely made up of Bosnian volunteers, therefore of Muslim religion, also recruited through the good offices of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. The Anschar, a German name that means scimitar, is decked out in the uniforms of the Waffen-SS. Within the Waffen-SS, belonging to the Corps becomes something mystical, and when on July 20th, 1944, Colonel von
Stauffenberg carries out
the assassination attempt at the Wolf's Lair as part of the so-called Operation Valkyrie, Himmler escapes the assassination, even though he was initially supposed to be one of the targets, and from that moment on, he is appointed as the supreme commander of the armed forces. This is because Hitler no longer trusts the generals. He only trusts him. Dartroy is Heinrich, the faithful Heinrich, so faithful that, however, he has no illusions about what the course of the war will be. Already in the fall of 1944, some of his emissaries find themselves in Strasbourg with the leaders of the major German industries. They begin to plan the escape because they understand that the Reich has only months, if not weeks. Hakta. The money is there. Some of it is what was stolen, forcibly taken from the Jews and all the other prisoners of the camps. Some came from requisitions, and others are provided by the German industrialists who are terrified of being expropriated by the Allies, who will have to win the war. They begin to plan the escape, a decidedly orderly escape to Spain, Portugal, Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, Egypt. These are the countries that are willing to welcome war criminals. Even Himmler would like to get away with it. So much so that in April 1945, when the Millennial Reich is falling apart and is close to collapse, he begins to negotiate openly after having done so underground for months. He negotiates with Volker Bernadotte, the Swedish Count Emissary of the future United Nations. And what does he negotiate? He negotiates his own life, his life, and the lives of his collaborators in exchange for thousands, tens of thousands of lives of survivors in concentration camps. Himmler knows he is at the top of the wanted list. He knows that if he is captured, there will be no mercy. If the Anglo-Americans catch him, he will be tried and hanged. If the Soviets catch him, he will be tortured and shot. So the choice is between a trial with hanging and a death after unspeakable suffering in a cell. He talks to the neutral Swedes, offering a way out, but Hitler discovers it. Hitler, who trusted him so much when informed of these talks, angrily dismisses Himmler from every rank, even orders the SS to go and arrest him, an order that is not carried out because, after all, the Reich is collapsing in those days. It's collapsing to the point that it's not even known what's happening in various parts of what was German territory and which is still partially controlled by the German armies, what's left of them. When Hitler commits suicide leaving as his successor to the president of the Reich, the Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, on the May 1st, 1945, Hitler presents himself for duty. He asks Dönitz to be part of the new government cabinet. He almost wants to impose his own figure since, after all of the old hierarchs, he is the last one alive and present. Since Goering has already been arrested, Goebbels has committed suicide, Hess is in prison in England, and Bormann has disappeared into thin air. Obviously, Himmler is not satisfied. He does not get any role. And when Dönitz, along with the great Admiral, Raeder, General Jodl, and Charles Keitel, signs the surrender with the Allies in Flensburg, from that moment on, Himmler becomes a wanted man. He tries to escape. He tries to escape with his most loyal followers, with Joseph Kirchmeier, his bodyguard, with his assistant Rudolf Braun, with two major aides, and with Professor Karl Gebhardt, the diabolical doctor of Ravensbrück, the same type of man as Joseph Mengele, the angel of death of Auschwitz. With this group for a few days, Himmler moves between Flensburg, which borders Denmark, and Hamburg. He seeks an escape route through the woods and small towns where the Allies only have patrols that occasionally circulate to intercept the stragglers. And it is in one of these villages named Banstead that Himmler's patrol is captured. Himmler had also tried to disguise himself, to change his identity, like many of his old subordinates had done, who perhaps had worn a Wehrmacht coat and a helmet to pretend to be former straggling soldiers. Himmler called himself Heinrich Itzinger, a rather peculiar precaution, but one that could not erase that chubby face and those round glasses. The English patrol that captures Himmler takes his entire group to a prison camp in Bramstedt, and it is there that, surprisingly, Himmler asks to speak with the camp commander, who already suspects his real identity. He reveals himself to be Heinrich Himmler and asks for an interview, and the interview to negotiate about himself, to obtain preferential treatment in exchange for alleged confidential information. Some say it's about the placement of treasures or documents related to the Reich's scientific experiments, the so-called Wunderwaffe, or the German atomic program. He is not believed or taken into consideration. The day after, at the end of an interrogation while being searched for documents or potential poison capsules, Himmler decides to bite the capsule, a capsule that he had inserted between two molars, which he had implanted some time before, like Goebbels. A precaution if captured by the enemy, biting a capsule containing potassium cyanide. Within seconds, his body is racked by intense convulsions, causing him to collapse to the ground. The English immediately realize, after all, the smell of cyanide is characteristic. They try to administer some drugs to him, something to block the action of the poison. They take him to the infirmary and subject him to a gastric lavage. It's all useless. Himmler's agony lasts about 10 minutes, then it fades away, fading away almost anonymously, while British and American intelligence begin to investigate and almost blame each other for the death of that man who could have been an excellent witness at the bar of the future Nuremberg trial. Himmler's body is taken to the forests around Lüneburg, but it will not be marked and will never be definitively found. It is said to prevent the burial place from becoming a sort of gathering place for nostalgic ex-Nazis, a mecca for petty worship for those who have not understood the tragedy of that regime. It is said to avoid speculation, even from the Soviets, who could have asked to exhume the body and analyze it. What is certain is that Himmler he took all his contradictions to the grave, that of having been a butcher without ever pulling a trigger, of having been a soldier without ever really fighting, of having been a thief without ever putting his hands in anyone's pocket, of having been a faithful executor of orders only to become a traitor in the end, of having been a faithful follower of eugenics through the so-called Lebensborn project, the farms of life where the new pure Aryan race was to be selected, of being himself a third level, a harmonious bastard, far from the ideal of the tall, thin, blonde German with blue eyes and square features. Heinrich Himmler, the one who created the Black Order, the one who was a symbol of a period of terror of about 15 years, hard to forget, not only for Germany, but for all of Europe. Heinrich Himmler, Hitler's advisor, his bodyguard, his military attaché, the man who had devised a terrifying repressive system and who in the end chose to die in the most anonymous way possible, biting that cyanide capsule to leave nothing behind but dust.